when they join our programs, they might not have even considered that it was viable for them to be an entrepreneur. And then by the end, there's been a change in confidence, in aspiration. I realized that we didn't have a way to really measure that. And so it was fine saying, oh, we noticed all these things about our program. But if we were going to the university or to external partners to try and get funding, I wanted to see if we could find a way to capture that data.
Hello and welcome to the Pathway to Impact podcast series. My name is Madeline Arkins, Research Project Officer at UIN and your host for today. In this episode, we chat with Emily Davies, Head of Student Entrepreneurship at the University of Exeter. Emily shares insights from their latest evaluation of their entrepreneurship programs, revealing how student feedback is shaping their approach and uncovering new opportunities for growth. I have the pleasure of speaking with Emily Davies on her work developing an evaluation framework for the incubation and pre-incubation programs at the University of Exeter. Emily actually presented this work for any of you who joined us in Madrid earlier this year at UIN's conference. She presented this work, and I think it's a really concrete example of how to quantify what is often deemed unquantifiable, intangible in entrepreneurship education. So a little bit about Emily. Emily is the head of student entrepreneurship at the University of Exeter, where she also leads the student startup team. There, she collaborates with both academic and professional services colleagues to foster an entrepreneurial culture across all campus, broadening access to entrepreneurial education and nurturing student and graduate startup businesses. Before this, Emily worked as global employability consultant at the University of Exeter and has also previously managed experiential undergraduate education programs for CAPA, the Global Education Network. And beyond higher education, Emily also worked in marketing for a regional arts centre and a music festival, focusing particularly on audience development and community engagement. So lots of experience to pull from, and very glad that you're here today. Emily, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's lovely to be here, so thank you.
Maybe to get us started, Emily, can you just tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to your current role in the student startup, student entrepreneurship space in Exeter?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the intro and the sort of summary of it's been quite a sort of winding road to get to where I am. And I think, as you mentioned, I started off in the arts and I wanted to work in sort of arts marketing and events, and did that with a theatre and a music festival, and then did various things in between, but sort of found my way into higher education. I guess it's probably about 13 years ago now. First working for this American company, working with students who were coming over from the States to London to have a sort of educational experience in London, but also to do internships. And I found that I really loved working with students and helping them to explore and discover what it is that they enjoy and what they're good at, and to get professional experience across a whole range of different industries. And from there, I then moved to do a slightly similar role in Exeter, wanted a change from London and thought Devon might be the place to head for. It was a bit of a gamble. I didn't know a huge amount of people down here, but I joined the University of Exeter just over 8 years ago, and initially did a sort of maternity cover contract, which was supporting students who were going overseas to do placements from Exeter. They were flipping it the other way around. And when that contract came to an end, it came about, as many things in my life seem to have done, through serendipity, but I met a startup in Exeter who were running entrepreneurship education programs through Erasmus. So they were bringing students from all sorts of different countries, as well as from the UK, to do these short sort of entrepreneurship programs. And the idea was to develop skills and confidence and competencies in students. They were normally 16 to 19-year-old students, but through the lens of trying to get them to think about starting up business ideas. And so I was drafted in to be an additional facilitator for a 2-week programme with a group of 40 Irish students, many of whom had never travelled outside of Ireland before. They'd never done anything like this programme before. And I found it really energising, and seeing how the students responded and the ideas that they came up with and how they grew in confidence as the 2 weeks went on. And even those who were a bit sceptical or didn't fully buy in at the beginning actually got quite excited when they got the chance to develop their ideas. And I loved that experience. It was it was just over a few months that I was providing additional facilitation support. And then again, I guess this opportunity came up at the university, which was a brand new role at the time as student startup manager. And there'd been some great work already happening in Exeter to support entrepreneurship and enterprise, but there was, I guess, a desire to try and formalise the programmes and offer access to more students and to build out the entrepreneurship offering at Exeter. So I applied and thankfully got the job. And so I started that just over 7 years ago. And at the time, it was just me in that team. I had a great boss and mentor called Joe, who's still around, who'd led on business support and had worked with student entrepreneurship, but it wasn't really a formal part of his role. He just sort of got involved because he really enjoyed it and he saw that there was an opportunity to support students. And so I had this, he gave me a lot of creative freedom really and breathing space to just try things out and build a program and to try different types of workshops, to try structuring it in different ways and to see what students responded to. And I just feel really lucky to have been given that opportunity. And like I said, so much kind of opportunity to be creative, especially in the early days. And so, yeah, the program's evolved over the last 7 years. I've now got a team, so there's now 6 of us who are spread across both our Exeter and our Cornwall campus. And we deliver these programs every term that are cohort based. Then 2 main phases. So we have a pre-incubator program, which is designed to take students from the kind of idea stage, even if it's really early stage idea, through to market validation. So understanding how are they going to go out and actually test and validate their ideas. And then the second phase is also a sort of term-long program, which is the incubator, which takes them from that point of market validation all the way through to actually launching their business. And so I guess some of the key things about the programs is that they are cohort based, which is something we moved to about 3 years ago. And it's really helped in terms of securing that engagement from the students and creating a really clear pathway for them. It's in those sort of 2 phases, and each of those programs is repeated in the autumn and the spring so that there's multiple opportunities for students to get involved. I probably should have said it's all extracurricular. So we work closely with curricular programs, but our programs are totally outside the curriculum and involve students from across all faculties and disciplines and years of study. And we're open also to any kinds of ideas. So it could be sort of new products, social enterprises, tech-enabled startups, sort of anything that a student wants to develop, and we'll try and help them to do that. So yeah, that's overview. Whistle stop.
Yeah, I love it. Whistle stop tour.
Yeah.
It's also lovely to hear that it, as you said, it was a brand new role, the head of the student startup team. And it also sounds like you were really given the creative freedom, which is the essence of, I think, an entrepreneurial mindset. If you're really given the creativity and time to iterate and ideate and see what works and what doesn't. On that, I want to get to this all-important evaluation framework. How did that come to be? And tell us a little bit more about what it does, what it measures.
The evaluation framework was really something that had been in my mind for a few years. And some of it, I think that we would do these sort of annual reports where we talk about how many students we'd engaged, how many had started new ventures, how many grants had been awarded. And we'd also track graduate outcomes, so to see how many of those continued to run their startups post-graduation and the economic impact. But I think I felt it. And then I noticed talking to other colleagues working in this field that I think the impact and the value of these programs is so much more complex than that. And there's so much more depth to it. And I think we'd talk about how we see changes in their confidence or in their aspirations or in their belief in whether they can do something that maybe when they join our programs, they might not have even considered that it was viable for them to be an entrepreneur. And then by the end, we see and kind of sense and hear from them that there's been a change in confidence, in aspiration. But I realized that we didn't have a way to really measure that. And so it was fine saying, oh, we noticed all these things about our program. But if we were going to the university or to external partners, for example, to try and get funding to grow the programs or to add different elements, I wanted to see if we could find a way to capture that data so that we'd have evidence of these things that wasn't just reliant on us being able to get a student in the room to talk about their experience or having a video testimonial to put up. And so that was the sort of starting point for wanting to try and develop a new evaluation framework. And so I then worked with a colleague called Hilary Stevens. She did some incredible work in building the structure and the theory behind the evaluation that we've now implemented. And we decided that we would introduce a sort of shorter survey at the beginning of each programme. So there's about 10 or 11 questions in the pre-survey. And that was really just to understand when they're coming into the programme at that very first session, like before we've even started the workshop, what is their attitude towards entrepreneurship? How attractive is it to them to start a business? How hard do they think it might be to start a business? Do they believe that they have the skills and abilities and competencies to be able to actually do it? And another question that we asked is around how much their employment decisions might be influenced by others, because that's also something that through talking to students, I think some people feel pressure from their parents who might be saying, this is really nice that you've tried to start a business, but isn't it time that you think about what you're really going to do when you graduate, or being influenced by peers? Or so that was another question that we built into the pre-survey. And then at the end of each program, so there's a slightly different evaluation for the pre-incubator and the incubator, and that's a much longer survey. So it's about 50 questions. So it's quite a substantial piece of work, and I can talk about that later in the challenges, but I think it was broken down into a number of different sections. So the first part was looking at their satisfaction with the programme. So for us, understanding what did they think about the programme content, delivery, did they find it effective, did they enjoy it? We then asked them questions that asked them to reflect on their learning. So in that, we're trying to understand how have the programmes, if at all, influenced their confidence in their knowledge and skills, their sort of entrepreneurial intent, their attitude towards entrepreneurship as a viable graduate path. The third section is about entrepreneurial capabilities. So we're asking them to reflect on the core sessions. So that those questions are really based around each of the topics that we have in our workshops. Have they got a handle on what an MVP is and how they might conduct a market validation experiment? Or do they feel confident that they could put a basic cash flow forecast together? And again, we're wanting to understand, has the teaching been, and do they feel confident in those things, or are there still areas where there are gaps in their knowledge or where they might need some additional support? The fourth section is about personal capabilities. So we're trying to understand, do they believe that they have the kind of personal and practical skills required to become an entrepreneur, to think creatively, to respond to constructive criticism, and also to be able to give constructive criticism to others. And then the last part is about coming back to that question about sort of perceptions of entrepreneurship and asking them more about the sort of future plans and whether they would consider pursuing an entrepreneurial path, to see if we could measure between the pre-survey and the post-survey whether any change has occurred, whether they're more or less likely to pursue an entrepreneurial path after the programs, and also whether they perceive it as being harder or easier or about the same. So there's a lot going on in the survey, and I'm really happy if anyone would like sort of more details about it afterwards. I'm really happy to share that. But yeah, we were trying to understand it on quite a lot of different levels.
It sounds like a really holistic approach. And as you said, it's, I guess, what's needed when you can't always get a physical person in the room to be that testimonial. I'd love to hear, you brought this up already, but everyone always wants to know the juicy challenges of what was involved. If they were to also attempt this in their own institution, what must they overcome? What Herculean attempt must they make?
So I think the biggest challenge probably that people would guess is that it's not easy to get people to fill in surveys and evaluations. So
no way.
No way, it's crazy, especially if a survey has 50 questions to it. So that has definitely been difficult. I've had conversations with my team where they're saying maybe we could make it a bit shorter and then maybe we'd get more responses. And I really didn't want to do that, because I think the whole point was trying to get this richness of data and insights that we weren't getting before. But the thing that has been really key for us is that we've built it into the sessions now. Before we start the very first workshop, we do some introductions, and then we say, before we launch into any of the content, can you just fill in this short survey for us? And so they do it in the room. It's all sort of digital. They get a link through Microsoft Forms. And then we do the same at the end of the programme. So we set aside time in one of the final sessions for them to complete the evaluation, which has massively increased the response rate. So I think that's made the biggest difference. I think also giving them context about what we're trying to do, because a couple of questions came up at the conference around, if you are in the room with them and you're asking them to do this survey, is that going to influence or kind of bias the things that they're going to say? We put the link up and then we leave them to do it, and it's all anonymized, so we don't know whose responses, we don't look at the kind of responses compared to the individual. But I think giving them context as to why we're doing this, I think with anything, if you can explain to people and help them understand the rationale behind doing it, and that actually a lot of it is about us wanting to continually improve what we do and understand, what are you getting from this, and are there things that are missing? How can we make it better for future students? How can we ensure that we're delivering real value through the programs so that we can continue doing the work that we do? And I think just taking a bit of time to help them understand the context of it, that we're not just doing this as a tick box exercise, that we really do use this information and we really value the kind of insights that it's giving us.
Yeah, also a vote
Yeah.
of confidence maybe in, yeah, how much you value their own experience of the programs. And are there any maybe light bulb moments that came out of the insights from the evaluation framework or the
Mm.
results from the surveys that you got?
I think some of it has been quite validating of our programs. We've tried to keep, that process that you were saying earlier, continually revisiting and trying to improve and say, how can we do this better? How can we, make sure that we're also sort of moving with the times and responding to changing student needs, but also the kind of environment around us. So I think in a lot of ways, there are times when you go, are we doing the right thing? And is this what students want? And is it making a difference like we think it is? And so it's been validating sort of hearing or seeing the data that, where they're telling us they feel more confident in and the things that they've learned and how it's shaped their ideas about entrepreneurship and about their own businesses. I think it's been interesting also sort of, we're a way out of sort of COVID times now, but I think that transition back from delivering everything online to doing a lot more stuff in person, but some of the content we've still kept online. And actually, we've had feedback from students saying, although they like some of the online content, they want more opportunities to be in person, to build connections and community with one another. And so that's helpful in us understanding what they want and what they need and what they're seeking. And I think also I thought I had a few stats from the end around that intention to start a business and their perception of how hard it might be. I think it's been because that feels like quite a kind of tricky thing to try and get at the nub of, particularly in the pre-incubator program, which is the kind of early stage. At the beginning, about 75% of them on average had the intention that they thought they would want to start a business in the next 3 years. And that increased to 84% by the end of the program. And then in terms of their perception of how hard it might be, that had decreased from 37% to 28% in that program. So I guess it's that kind of validation we are doing the right thing and that it's hopefully we are trying to reduce some of those barriers, whether they're real barriers or perceived barriers that students might feel towards this as being a viable path that they can take. So yeah.
I think that leads very naturally onto a question I just see in the Q&A from Faye. So Faye asked, if the data is anonymized, are you missing further data on individuals, for example, whether they have protected characteristics, gender? Would be interesting to see whether women's experiences, for example, are different to male counterparts.
Yes, so I should have mentioned, so in the pre-survey, we have data, so we introduced an EDI questionnaire at the beginning, and I was saying to you just before we started this call, it was the kind of main intention over the last year was to introduce that questionnaire so we could baseline where the programs are currently. And we're now working with a team at the university to see how the kind of the demographics of our cohort compares to the demographics of the whole student body, so that we can see, are we doing enough to make sure that the programs are inclusive and that we are getting a diverse cohort of students coming through. I think we can look at differences between male and female student experiences. I think one thing that has come out for me is that there's relative parity, like in the pre-incubator programs, between it's about 60% male, 40% female students. That changes slightly when we get to the incubator program. So we see a slight drop off of female students and more male students who join the second part of the program. And that has also in this past year certainly translated into the larger amounts of funding that students can pitch for. And I think that's something I'm really interested in. Again, I think possibly comes about also through conversation and maybe some focus groups with students. Some of those female students have said to us, oh, I don't know if I'm quite ready yet, or I don't know if I've progressed enough, and maybe I shouldn't pitch for money yet, and maybe I don't need any more money, and I'll figure that out later. And I think that some of that is around confidence and trying to build their confidence and say, actually, no, you should absolutely pitch. And it doesn't guarantee that you'll get the funding, but you should put your hat in the ring. And this is a really good business. It's really viable. You put the work in. And I think that's a really rambly answer, but I think there are insights that we can draw.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's even on that like micro level that you can see the drop off of female participation into the incubation program and the pitching. We know that from an economic development perspective, we also see those knock-on effects when we know that new businesses will account for most net job creation. So having even that small number of drop off is just magnified. So it's great to see that there is focus and interest in that side of things. We've got loads of great questions coming in. Maybe one that would be a good one just for learning. Someone asked, what did you learn that could be improved about your programs?
That's a good question.
I'm sure there are many.
I think there were some of the feedback was around like we noticed some of the things like how to register a company, the kind of producing cash flow forecasts, some of the legal questions that students had, like about their businesses, whether that's about bringing somebody new into their venture or about their IP. I think it was something that students didn't seem as confident about by the end of the programs. So we've made some adjustments to that already in terms of adding some additional sessions for those students that perhaps not just that they haven't had a business background, but that maybe it's something that they're struggling with. So I think identifying specific topics that we deliver as workshops within the programs, but that for whatever reason there are still students who are not feeling totally confident with that. So I think that has, we've definitely then been able to review those sessions and say, how can we improve it? How can we offer additional support for students who might want or need it? Yeah.
Okay. I also see some questions about tracking students after graduation. How many students actually set up a business, or indeed, how can you confirm whether they do indeed pursue entrepreneurship?
Yes, it's a great question. I think it's a challenge, to be completely honest. I think we obviously, I guess in the UK, have an annual graduate survey that we do, which I think everybody has challenges with trying to get that data. So one thing that we did was that we created a graduate entrepreneurs network. So again, sort of this was a few years ago that we started. It was before COVID times when there were lots of in-person events. But for us in Devon, we know that a lot of our students moved to London or back to the southeast after they graduated. And so we started running graduate events in London just 2 or 3 times a year. And we'd invite a couple of speakers. We would position it as a chance for those entrepreneurial graduates to make new connections, perhaps with graduates that are a few years ahead of them and also with one another, and to check in with us and try to keep that relationship going. So I think we've done some of that through sort of a graduate events network. We also have a LinkedIn page that we invite current students to, but also means that we have opportunity to update them, or if we want to check in, because when they leave, if suddenly they don't have the university email address anymore, then LinkedIn's been a great way to be able to maintain that relationship. Because the programs are delivered over the course of a year, and I'd say generally we work with students up to probably it's about 18 months, sometimes 2 years, and it may be that they try multiple ideas within that time. And I think if we can build that relationship with them whilst they're in our programs and they feel supported and they've had a good experience, I think they make the effort to keep in touch with us and tell us when they've got good news stories or if there's been developments in their businesses. So yeah, some of it is through the sort of hard surveys, the graduate surveys, but then also some of it is through that more informal kind of communication networks, like either through LinkedIn or on a personal basis.
Nice. You've got a variety of touch points, it seems, across the journey. Before I let you go, Emily, it's testament to the interest of this topic and the work that you and your colleague Hilary Stevens put in that there's so much interest in questions. One question was about narrative and strategy. How does your data, has it helped you when speaking with internal partners, for example, university executive boards and external partners, or indeed, how do you present this data to funders and stakeholders?
I think the conference in Madrid was the first time I'd really talked very much about the evaluation framework. And I think for me, it's still a bit of a work in progress. So having opportunity like this to talk about it and also to see what questions people have that make me go, I need to go back and think about that harder, or I need to continue working on how to tell the story of what we're trying to do and also the data that we are gaining. So yeah, as yet, I haven't had to sort of present it to external funders, but it's definitely something I am looking to do because I think, as with everybody, I think the current landscape, we're definitely going to need to go and find some external funding to support the programs. But I'd love also if anybody would be interested in, I'd love to try and see whether the evaluation would work in other people's programs. And so if anybody's interested in that, I've had a conversation with a few different institutions so far, but I'd be really happy to share it and try to see if it would be useful for other people as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Emily. Maybe just before we pop off, I wanted to get your last thoughts on this because we also spoke last year at the, yes, it was last year, at the Budapest conference for UIN, where you mentioned that entrepreneurship programs at Exeter are very much about a long-term investment in the people and developing the skills and talents of those individuals and not just solely the ideas themselves. Can you elaborate a little bit on how this philosophy maybe influences the way you go about the programs you design and deliver in Exeter?
It's a big question, but I will try. I do think it's really about building relationships and building trust, and of students feeling that, like I said, that it's not just a tick box exercise for us. That I think that I'm really lucky. I have a really great team who are really talented at what they do, but also genuinely are really passionate about the work that we do. And I think, like, I had a conversation with a student the other day who's just graduated this summer, and he's got a brilliant business idea. It's really challenging. I think there's lots of hurdles still ahead of him in terms of developing it. It's going to require investment. He needs co-founders. We've been having phone calls, and I've been just trying to ensure that support doesn't just drop once he's graduated, of saying, okay, well, you've graduated, you have your degree, you did amazingly well, and how can we still support you? And if there are things you want to talk through, if you're looking for contacts, if you're looking for connections, I just think it's that willingness, and it comes from a very genuine place of, we've got to know these people and believe in their capability, and whether that's to do something entrepreneurial or not, that's not the only thing that we care about. I think it's very much about the people and about saying, well, it's got to be what's best for you. And if you decide that actually this isn't the one right now, that's absolutely fine too. And we'll support you with whatever you want to go and do. And if you want to come back in 3 years' time or 5 years' time and chat to us about another idea, then we're happy to do that. But yeah, I think it's just about people and relationships, and just the care, I think, that goes into it, and caring about people, trying to find what it is that they're good at and what they care about, and give them the confidence and the skills to be able to go and do something that means something to them, and where they feel a sense of purpose, and yeah, where they can make a change in whatever way that might be for them, or whatever that means to them.
Yeah, leaving that door open for more support.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Lovely.
And
that's a lovely note to end on, I think.
Yeah.
Lovely, hopeful note. And there were more questions, Emily, but this is, I'm afraid, all we have time for. To all who came and joined, thanks so much, and thank you for all the really interesting questions. Emily, if people want to find out more about the Student Startup team, or indeed yourself, how can they get in contact with you? Where can they find you?
I will put my email address in the chat. You can, so you can feel free to email me. And if you have questions, I know the time went really fast. So if there's anything else that you want to know, then do drop me a line and let me know. You can also find me on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, really happy to talk to anybody that would like to see about the evaluation framework or about the programs or anything.
Fabulous. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you're enjoying our podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice to help others find this content too.